Whoops. I always got to remember to turn that light on. Hi, everybody. It's meteorologist Joe Chaffee on this Monday night, the 25th of February, 2019. I always forget to turn that light on, but it's there. It might be a little bit on the bright side. Let me just push it back just a little bit here. That'll probably make it a bit better. Okay, so we are seeing the wind starting to ease off here, at least in my neck of the woods, after what was a really rough night and morning with wind gusts of 60 to 70 miles an hour. It's interesting. I noticed it from, I've gone through these wind events before where I am in central Long Island, and there's a point where the sound of the howling of the howling wind is a bit different when it's at about 30 to 40 with some gusts, odd gusts to 50, as opposed to when you're seeing sustained winds of, say, 35 to 45 with gusts between 60 and 70. And I know that I had some gusts up between 60 and 70 miles an hour because I can tell by how my house literally moans when wind gusts start to get over 60 miles an hour. I remember with Hurricane Sandy listening to this sound. It was just like it was the house basically trying to react to the stress that the wind was putting on it, and it would make this obvious sound that was different from when the winds were, winds are 35, 40, or 45 miles an hour. So there was some pretty rocky gusts out there for sure, but we're starting to see those wind advisories come down. The pressure gradient is slowly relaxing from Long Island and New York City and southern New England westward. So we're going to see the winds continue to slowly ease overnight and during the day Tuesday to the east of there and on up as you head through still into parts of upstate New York and in New England. We are going to have some strong winds for a little while tonight, but here too we're going to gradually see some easing as we go through the day on Tuesday. So we're going to start with tonight's watches and warnings. We in the Northeast, of course, you've got the advisories. They're done in New Jersey, except for the northeastern counties, and they're still up for the lower Hudson Valley. You start to go to Dutchess County and Ulster County northward. That's where you still have the high wind warning up for a while, and also continuing across much of Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, also into New Hampshire and southern Vermont. You got some pockets where the winds are kind of dropping down off of criteria, and those looks like 3 or 4 orange boxes there, the smaller counties that are still under a blizzard warning. Now, they didn't get a whole lot of snow up in north central New York. It was, from the amounts that I saw, there were some 6-inch amounts in a few places. They'll probably update those numbers later today. Maybe a few spots wound up with up to a foot. They've certainly had more than that out of lake effect snow events in the past, but the blizzard conditions, which are a visibility criteria, you could have an inch of snow and still wind up with a blizzard if it cuts your visibility under a quarter of a mile for several hours or more. So the conditions are still there. And we've got some surrounding winter weather advisories, a few pockets of winter weather advisories in northwestern Wisconsin. And then you start to get into this next weather system that's coming into the west. And we've got a large area of winter storm warnings in the southern half of Oregon. They were also up for the northwestern part of Oregon. They've come down since. Warnings down through the mountains of the Sierra Nevadas in California surrounding high wind issues around those, into Nevada and into parts of eastern Oregon and southwestern Idaho. And then, of course, you've got more winter storm warnings up into southern Washington state and then extending eastward across Idaho into a fairly large size chunk of the state of Montana and into western Wyoming. Some of that energy is going to be coming eastward. And that is going to start what looks like a parade of weak systems. I'm not 100% sold on whether all of them are going to be weak or if one of them winds up being a little bit more important with respect to the overall weather pattern in the eastern part of the United States. And we'll get to that in just a second. Now, we, of course, came through a period here where many areas in the Mid-South got clobbered with rain. And over the next 7 days, when we look at WPC's rainfall forecast, it is a bit better than what we were looking at this time last week, with 7-inch plus amounts across parts of the Tennessee Valley. Now we're looking at generally the first blue line. The darkest blue is a half an inch. So you're looking at half an inch into southern Virginia, and then you start to get into some bigger amounts. Looks like the concentration of the heavier precip is right along the Gulf Coast for the next week, with a few pockets there of 2 to 3 inches. It's, one good thunderstorm to put that down, but not some of this is going to be overrunning rain, and that runs out to the east off the Carolinas. You can look at this in terms of how the heavy rainfall area is structured and kind of get a feel for the fact that there probably are going to be some southern systems that are going to pass off the southeast coast. And remember, the jet stream in the Atlantic is like a ruler going pretty much straight west to east, so there's not a whole lot out there that suggests that these storms can lift northward up the coast, at least from what we've been seeing in the last couple of weeks. And that still, to me, is how to approach things going forward as far as the longer range. Out in the west, some big precip coming into California. Now, some of this is front-end loaded, but there's going to be more moisture coming into California from the southwest. And we're looking at some areas here in northeastern California indicating amounts. I think that's the 10-inch yellow in liquid, and that could certainly be snow in the mountains. So, we're talking about mega amounts of snow here, perhaps, in some of the mountains in eastern California, while some heavy rains for central and northern California to the Oregon border. Then it kind of relaxes a bit, and a lot of dry spots here for the next 7 days across parts of the Pacific Northwest, although it looks pretty active in the Rockies. So WPC is always a good place to go. The Weather Prediction Center with their quantitative precipitation forecast, as they always seem to have a very unbiased, good handle on how weather systems are going to behave in the longer term. All right, the U.S. satellite tonight, and there you have it. Now, you're seeing streams of moisture here that are going to get involved in weather systems and how they develop in the coming days. And of course, you've got the system up in the northeast that's pulling away now into eastern Canada. Clouds in the Gulf states. We have some rain showers that are moving to the Gulf Coast, the central Gulf Coast, and that moisture is pushing east-northeastward. And of course, you can also see the activity that's going on out in the western part of the U.S. And I've got the Pacific Loop here, if I can find it. And there you have it. I'm going to bring it up front now. Hold on one second. Let's bring this down. And we'll show you the Pacific Loop. The weather in the east is very dependent on this flow that is set up in the Pacific, because a lot of this energy is going to get sent eastward, albeit in pieces. Even though it comes in rather impressively when it moves into the west, it is not going to be that impressive as it moves out to the east. But take a look at this loop, and you can see the driving force. On the lower left, just above the NOAA emblem there, if you look closely, you can actually see the big island of Hawaii. And as we go through the daytime hours, the clouds that develop there during the hours in the afternoon, and in the morning anyway, because of the time difference. And that is, from Hawaii, go up a little bit to the north and over to the right, and it's very obvious you've got this spiraling storm that is sitting out there. And notice how it's pretty much dictating this flow. In the middle of the picture, you've got this long stream of tropical moisture coming up from the Pacific tropics and moving northward and then turning northeastward into California and on up into the northwest. So this is an almost endless pipeline of moisture, of tropical moisture that's still coming into the west. And of course, we've got troughiness out there, so it's cold in the western part of the United States. It continues to be well below average in terms of the temperatures, and as a result, we're seeing more snow, and we're seeing it in areas that usually don't get a whole lot of it in the eastern part of Oregon, for example. I was looking at the forecast in Eugene, Oregon, which is not, a big an area where snow is a big deal, but they were under a winter storm warning and forecast to get, I think it was about 4 to 6 inches, which for them is a pretty sizable snowfall. And there's going to be more action, of course, with this flow coming from the tropical Pacific and shooting up to the northwest from there. But again, as far as the weather going forward in the eastern part of the United States, it will be pieces of this that will be moving along in the flow. Now, let's come back to the current observations. The EDD, the enhanced data display from the Weather Service, it's up, it's down. It was down last night for a while, and this morning, now it's back up again. And I've got this set up to plot right now the winds, the wind barbs, and the highest wind gusts. And it seems that at least from Rhode Island and through Connecticut now, and the Hudson Valley and back through New Jersey, the coastal areas might still be seeing gusts in the 30s. But we're not seeing any 40s anymore in terms of gusts. And of course, you go inland now, and we've seen that these winds have also pretty much dropped off, gusts up to about 25, 26 miles an hour, and that's just about it. Still some sustained winds, though, at every bit of 15 to 20. Now you move your way up into New England, we're still getting some pockets with gusts to 50. There's a gust here in, where is that? So that looks like it's near Randolph, Massachusetts, a gust to 67 miles an hour. That is impressive. It's still getting gusts of 40 to 50 throughout coastal Massachusetts. We've got a gust here near Palmer, Mass at 51, not too far from Springfield. And then as we go further north, the winds in Maine, gusts to 30 to 40 miles. There's a gust of 52, and this is at Mount Desert Rock, which is offshore. And the other buoy 44027 showing a gust of 42 there. So little by little, this is all going to start dropping off, and we will continue to see gradual improvement. You go back through into western PA, which at this time last night there were gusts of 50 and 60 miles an hour all over the place. Now we're seeing the winds have really dropped off there to under 15, and in some cases even under 10 miles an hour. Some gusts into the high teens, big deal. And the winds have also dropped off along the lake shores of Erie and Ontario, where they've been kind of crazy too from last night. Saw some gusts in the low 70s in and around Buffalo. And we have the lake effect that's been going on off of Lake Ontario. The surface map as of 4 o'clock this afternoon, there's your low. Midway between New Brunswick and Newfoundland, there's a 972 closed isobar, so probably a 970-ish low as it is occluded out and continues to move away to the northeast. The isobars are still pretty tight till you get to right around New York City, and then they start to widen out a bit. And then once you get into western PA, they really widen out and start to get under the influence of the much calmer high to the west. One center down in Indiana, southern Indiana, northwestern Kentucky, and then you've got double highs sitting over the Dakotas. The air here is pretty cold, teens, single digits, and then you start to get into some below zero temperatures as you head up through Minnesota and on up through the northern plains. On the other side, as we go to the west, here's your the outcome of that stream of moisture as we showed you going into Northern California, and you've got 3 lows being analyzed in Oregon, from the southwestern part of the state to the northeastern part. The cold high is trying to sort of build itself around it, so you've got cold temperatures draining westward into western Oregon and northern California. There's the trailing cold front there. And back down in the southwest, which of course we all know what transpired late last week with the big snowstorm that occurred in Flagstaff, Sedona, and we had winter storm warnings and temperatures below freezing all the way down to Tucson. Well, they're in the 60s today as of 1 o'clock this afternoon. So they have made a big recovery. And in the southeast, we're seeing 70s across Florida, down through the Gulf states, temperatures mostly in the 60s. Very dry here, dew points all in the 20s with this high building down. And then you're starting to see a little bit of return flow with the 60s back into Texas and Oklahoma. Dry dew points in Oklahoma and down into Texas. Starting to see those dew points come up right along the coastal bend down into South Texas with dew points now in the 60s. And of course, we have rain in the central Gulf states, which we'll pick up on the radar. Here's the look. We'll come back to the Northeast in a second, but we've got this area of rain, and I point this out because this is part of the equation going forward for the first weather system in the East on Wednesday. So this small area of rain representing weak low pressure that is moving northeastward. And now, of course, we've got this, still got this band of lake effect snows coming in off of Lake Ontario, but that's been slowly diminishing as we've gone through the afternoon and evening, and it's going to diminish further as we move through the night. A little bit of activity up in New Hampshire and parts of Maine, a little bit of snow here moving up through northern Illinois, and then out in the west, we've got that snow in Montana, southern Washington, into parts of Oregon, and here's that plume of big rain that has moved into northern California from San Francisco northward. And, of course, this is all going to translate to heavy snow in the mountains in eastern California and also into parts of Nevada, northwestern Nevada and northern Nevada, where we've got all these winter storm warnings going on. So the activity here, again, all about the pieces that are going to be that we're going to be dealing with going forward. Here's that last wide view, and then we'll take it on to the weather models tonight. So here's the issue going forward. First, I'll take you through the surface map through the end of the week. Then we're going to switch off to the upper air because I want to get everybody to get a feel for what's happening here. And there's your system in the northwest that has moved in, the heavy precip in California. On the other side, in the northeast, you see the back side of that intense storm from the Great Lakes this weekend between New Brunswick and Newfoundland beginning to push away. And, of course, the gradient relaxes on Tuesday and the high builds in. Now, here comes the first energy coming out of the system in the northwest, moving through the plains Tuesday night into Wednesday morning. Got this little high that parks itself up near in upstate New York, near Plattsburgh, Glens Falls, and there's weak low pressure here. There's a weak low in central Illinois. There's another weak low probably sitting over just to the east of New Orleans there, and lower pressures that, if you follow the isobar, there's a weak inverted trough that runs into South Carolina, Georgia. So there's another weakness of low pressure there. As we move along, the key with regards to the forecast for later Wednesday night, this is going to be, I think it's going to be a 1 to 3, 2 to 4 inch snowfall for somebody across the Great Lakes, and then northern Pennsylvania through upstate New York and into parts of New England. The question is going to be, where's the southern edge of this going to wind up? Because if you'll notice on the GFS, and if we look at the dam on the close-up view, it cuts off in northern New Jersey. I think if you draw a line basically from Sandy Hook to just north of Trenton, precip just shuts off there. So there's going to be a tight line from a coating to about an inch to maybe a couple of inches. And this is also a type of system where you just got to grind out whatever you can out of it because of the fact that it's weak. The primary low dies, there's that weak coastal low that develops, and it does nothing. It just basically slides out to the east. So it's whatever moisture that comes out of the west that survives the trip over the Great Lakes. There's I guess just enough energy aloft to hold this area together, and you wind up with something that produces maybe a couple of tenths of liquid, perhaps a bit more as you go up in upstate New York and up through parts of, say, northern Connecticut into Massachusetts. Maybe somebody winds up with 3/10 or 4/10, and you get a band of 2, 3, or 4 inches. I don't know that you would really see much more than that out of this. And of course, in the meantime, you've got more pieces coming in, and here coming out of the west. So here comes the next one for Friday, which pretty much comes out the same way, just a little bit further to the south and a little weaker. So you got this area of weak precip that comes through late Thursday night, early Friday morning. Notice there's another low that's off the southeast coast of the United States. It's weak, and then it gets ejected out to the east. And now we're left with where we are after that goes out, is what is going to happen after that? Because this is where we've seen models, start one way and go another. And I want to switch at this point to the upper air. One of the things, and I think it would probably be better off if we use this one, because then we can actually see the jet streak. So let me run back here. Let's run back and watch this upper air. I want you to get a sense here for just how flat the flow is across the United States. Yes, we do have a bit of a jet that's coming down out of Canada to keep things on the cold side, to some degree, on the colder side of average, let's say. And remember now, the average temperatures are rising a degree every 4 or 5 days. Well, notice the flat nature of the flow through all of this week. Just a basic west to east flow. You could barely find where these disturbances are coming from. Look at the dark brown in northern North Dakota. So that's that first weather system. You can just follow that jet streak southeastward as it moves into New England, down to just south of New York City, and moves on through. So it's from this little shortwave that has a little bit of definition. You're going to wind up with whatever you wind up snow-wise for Wednesday night into Thursday morning. Now, at the same time, you notice the system that's in the south, a little jet streak there that's in the eastern Gulf. Look where that goes. That just goes pretty much straight east. The problem in the Atlantic remains the same. There's nothing here, nothing that would suggest that you could get something like this to climb to start moving northward in a better pattern, where you would get something to come down from the north and dig down. If you had more storms out in the Atlantic to kind of force this southern system to take a different route, you could wind up having a shortwave in the northern stream trying to at least partially phase or lift up the system up from the south. And, that's sometimes they get together and you wind up with a pretty sizable snowfall. But it's not going to happen with this upper flow. Now, that moves out, and of course, very quickly behind it for later Thursday night, Friday morning, you've got a couple of weak short waves here that do the same thing. And then after that, this is where it becomes a question, because the GFS, up until the last couple of runs, was trying to bring a short wave. I'll run it backwards. This short wave that comes into the northwest on Friday moves eastward. This has a little bit more definition to it. At the same time, if you'll notice up north of Montana and North Dakota, there's an upper low there. So that gear is rotating around. Up until very recently, the models were kind of phasing that together, which was taking another storm to the Great Lakes. Perhaps this time around it would have been more to the eastern lakes for next weekend. But on the last few runs, you'll notice that the jet streak that comes in here, that short wave that comes into the northwest, never really phases with this upper low that closes off in northern Minnesota. You see how that jet just kind of streaks straight eastward across New Jersey and Long Island? It stays separate from that upper low. Now here's the other side of it. The icon model, for example, is the last model left standing with regards to the idea of phasing it and making for a cutter low to the Great Lakes. And here's how the GFS was resolving things, and now the icon's still holding on. But you see the difference here, how that short wave comes out from the northwest. Watch it there. And then you got this arm that comes down from the upper low north of North Dakota, and it phases it around. Look at where the dark red and brownish areas, those jet streaks there, that swing up toward the Great Lakes. So this is where, this is the big difference. So there's your icon model, all right? And here is your GFS, which is now, by the way, gone to the idea of what the Euro had, which is just keeping these things separate here. I have to tell you, it plays this look where it stays weak and separate. It goes against what we have been seeing, which is the idea of the systems wanting to try to cut toward the Great Lakes. So I want to wait another couple of runs to see if the icon model gives up the ghost, and we're going to go with this flatter look, and maybe we're going to have to wait for something to cut a little further down the road. So I'll switch back to the surface map now. And you'll see the outcome here on the surface map is that after that second low goes by on Friday, you've got another low that, again, weaker, further south, flatter, a low into northern Virginia, tries to redevelop off the coast here of Maryland, and you've got another weak low. Here is where an issue of how much cold air you're going to have in the east, down in the coastal areas. You might not have enough. You'll probably have it as you go inland in upstate New York and in through New England and back through Pennsylvania. But it might be, much more questionable. Again, this looks like, to me, not a robust system at all. And the air behind this is pretty cold. I mean, they got a pretty decent shot of cold air moving into the plains and into the upper Great Lakes and swinging into the eastern part of the U.S. And now, after that, you've got the model with this sort of cold, suppressed, dry look in the longer range. I'm sure we're going to have a couple of runs and a couple of models that are going to try to lift systems up the East Coast. But that is going to hinge on the Atlantic jet. So let's take a look at what the Atlantic jet has to tell us. Remember, what you don't want to see, if you want a storm to climb up the East Coast, you want other storms running around out here. You don't want a straight line traffic going straight east. Look at this on day 6. I'm sorry, day 6. Look at the jet in the Atlantic. We're looking here at the 18,000 foot level. Now here we are today, deep trough in the central Atlantic. Of course, you've got this wrapped up upper low and the big storm that's in eastern Canada between New Brunswick and Newfoundland, and that starts to move away to the east. Look what that does to the flow across the Atlantic. I mean, it just basically creates a straight line. It is a straight line jet as we head toward the end of the week and into the weekend, running not only just from the Atlantic, but pretty much straight across the U.S., out off the East Coast, straight out over toward Portugal and Spain. It's a ruler. There's nothing out here, and you can see that jet streak, how it runs east and moves off the coast and just kind of moves along there. That is not a jet stream that is conducive for storms along to move up the East Coast. The European was trying to imply that you could possibly pull this off in its long range, where it is forever, and we've seen this going on for how long now, is forever trying to take systems up the East Coast in one form or another, creating fantasy snowstorms, and it kind of did that today, late in the forecast period. Well, what the GFS is suggesting is that this upper low You see this upper low in the east, the upper low here over the Great Lakes for this coming weekend. That rotates up and around. You get another one behind it. And it just basically overwhelms cold air here in the eastern part of the United States. There's no room. There's no room for anything to try to come up the coast with an upper air setup like that. And then as we move further and further out into the long range, there's your little ridge that starts to pop up again as we head into mid-month. And in fact, if we jump over the Pacific side, which is a good thing to look at, let's see if we can get the same map, which they don't have. But we can take a look at least from the standpoint of what it looks like in the Pacific. Can we say fire hose again toward the end of the forecast period? It actually starts to show up long before that. If you notice here early on, going through this week, you don't have that straight line fire hose all the way across. You've got these upper lows, one near northeast of Hawaii, another one off the coast of Washington and Oregon, that has broken that endless flow out of the Pacific. But as we go through time, what happens? Well, as we head past, say, March 8th or 9th, all of a sudden that ruler jet is starting to come back again, and it is crashing into the west coast as we head toward days 12, 13, out to day 16. I honestly believe that once we get through the next 10 days to 2 weeks, that if you're rooting for a snow event to occur, you better hope it happens, because after that, I think we're done. I really do. Now, in the lower left, you have typhoon, I think it's Wu-tip. I think that's how it's pronounced. And it's east of the Philippines. And as we move through time, now sometimes these typhoons, this is a Category 5, by the way. I don't know what the history is with Category 5s out in the West Pacific. But they can get typhoons at any month of the year, so it wouldn't shock me at all if there's Category 5 typhoons on record during the month of February. But sometimes you can get these typhoons to recurve and move northward and northeastward, and they'll energize an upper low or a vortex up in Alaska, and you start to play the feedback game, the feedback loop game, and eventually leads to colder weather in the eastern part of the United States. Not this time around. If you'll notice that the typhoon just sits down here as we go through the not so long range, as we're only out to 48 hours and it's gone. You can't even find its reflection here on the upper air. Now, the forecaster's there, and I've got a shot of this, by the way, on the satellite. Very well defined on the first frames, but as soon as we switch over to the visible, you can still see the eye, but it looks like it's rapidly cloud filling, and it appears to me like this is starting to deteriorate. And it's going to wind up deteriorating pretty fast, because there are strong westerly winds just to the north of it. It'll start shearing this thing apart. And when you look at their forecast from the joint typhoon, this is Super Typhoon Wu-tip, warning number 27. You can find this, by the way, on Tropical Tidbits and under current storms. And this is from the Joint Typhoon Warning Center out in Japan, I believe, does all this. But they give their forecasts here out. They're carrying moving 340 degrees at 5 knots, and maximum sustained winds were 130, gusting to 160. So it was a Cat 5. And notice, I don't know if you guys could see the numbers here on the side here, but that's their forecast. Today's the 25th. They have it down to tropical storm strength by Wednesday at 1 o'clock our time. And then by the 2nd, it's gone. Okay? By the 2nd of March, which is Saturday, it's gone. So this is not going to have any opportunity at all to recurve whatsoever. So there's the tight forecast. I like the way they do their forecasts here. You get a lot of points. You can see the reference points with Guam. It's not a knock on the Hurricane Center. It's just that we don't get to really look at this stuff very often in the West Pacific. But it's very interesting how they do this with the wind radii and everything else. And you can see how they shrink it along as it moves toward the northwest, and then the remnant low cloud swirl is probably going to move with the low level winds, and it winds up getting kicked away off to the west. So, little interesting sidebar there for those of you who are into tropical meteorology, because you know what? Before long, we'll be in June, and we'll be in our own hurricane season. But we got a ways to get there yet. We still have to get spring to arrive. All right, so it's nice to see everybody on board. Izzy D, do you have a better chance of snow on Friday because you missed the first one on Wednesday? The problem with Friday, Izzy, is how much cold air are you going to have? How much cold air are you going to have with Friday? That's the thing. You got more cold air with Wednesday, and I think there's still a shot that at least for Wednesday you could wind up seeing that the southern edge of the snow push a little bit further to the south, maybe get down to about Route 195. I think that is a possibility. The one for Friday, I think the issue is going to be how much cold air. It might wind up being even a little colder than what's modeled, but also the system for Friday doesn't have a whole lot to it. It really doesn't. That looks very weak. Let's see. There's some. Okay, so what do we got here? Is there a battle going on with regards to what happens after March 8th or 9th? Peter Bicker, you know what? I have to kind of go along with that. I from the broad perspective, I think the Pacific Jet is just too. It's just too dominant, and it's going to want to come back. I'm kind of leaning in that direction. So whatever's going to happen has to happen between now and say March 10th or so, plus or minus a couple of days. And then after that, I think we're done. I really do. There's no blocking, by the way. In fact, last year, look, we are getting to the time of year, by the way, that. I will say this. I've said many times that blocking is incredibly overstated, okay, and overrated as far as impact. But I will make this exception. So let me just bring up the teleconnections here, just to give a broad view of what's happening. And it's very interesting what this all has evolved into, by the way. So give me 1 second. I'm going to open it up and bring it back up to the window. And I want to bring up my forecast with regards to Wednesday's snow, because I actually did have the opportunity to do a snow map today. And we'll call it an early call, although I doubt I'm going to wind up updating this very much. I took a little bit of a shot here, but let me bring the map up, and then you can see what I'm going for. Oh, come on. Hello. Sometimes I have the internet here can be so slow. Oh, God. Really? I appreciate everybody's patience. I'm almost where I got the map up and ready for view. All right, I'll get rid of that. And hopefully it doesn't crash my system again like it did the other day. Thank you. All right. So guess what? Let's look at these teleconnections. We're at a time of year, and last year proves it. We're at a time of year now where the average temperatures are going up. It's not going to be enough just to be seasonal. You're going to have to be below normal, and you're going to need some help. And a blocking signature would certainly help that along. And that was, I think that was a key reason last year why we had the 4 nor'easters, and why some of them really produced some big snow amounts, depending on your location. Not everybody participated, obviously. But look what we have now coming up. look at the upper right is the North Atlantic Oscillation of the NAO, which, by the way, we are negative right now for another couple of days. And then starting Saturday, it shoots up to strongly positive. So what that says, at least, is the fact that you're not going to get any help from colder air as a result of a negative NAO. Plus, you're going to have weather systems that are just going to basically continue to want to move along from west to east and just keep on going. So unless you wind up in a situation where you have enough cold air that maybe the negative EPO, which remains very strongly negative up through at least March 6th or 7th, will give you enough cold air. So if you get the surface to show up just right, and if you get things to show up just right, you could pull off an accumulating snow event. But on the other hand, take a look at remember for the last how many days now, have the models been trying to show the Pacific North America Index, or the PNA, which would lend to the idea of a ridge in the west and a trough in the east? Look at what it's gone to, and it's 3 days in a row now that it's done this. It is strongly negative. We were supposed to get to the neutral line, thinking back about a week or 10 days ago, around the 1st or 2nd of March. We're still strongly negative through the first couple of days of March, and then it's negative right through to March 11th and 12th. So I suspect that what you'll see here is, as we get toward around the March 12th, March 13th time frame, that PNA is going to start crashing negative again. The NAO is not going to matter because that's just going to move systems from west to east. And then you're going to start to get that EPO going positive. So maybe when you get this big spike up to the neutral line, you might be able to also pull something off if everything really just kind of times out perfectly in terms of the short waves that are running around. But I got to tell you, I really, every day that goes by, it gets harder and harder to hold your breath on this sort of stuff and think you're going to wind up with a different outcome. I'm guessing that we'll probably stand a better chance with the system for Wednesday, late Wednesday and Wednesday night. And this is what I did for my area. I drew the zero line from Sandy Hook to, let's call it northern Hunterdon County in New Jersey, and then on out to the northwest of from there. And I drew a 1-inch line from southern Nassau County across New York City, across Route 78, or somewhere between 78 and 80, and then take that out into Pennsylvania. I have a 2-inch line over keeping the eastern part of Long Island, possibly getting maybe 2 inches or a bit more. And there's that line also goes from about Bridgeport, north and west, from there on up into the Hudson Valley. And then I have a 3-inch line from Providence, west-northwestward toward Kingston. So that's where I think you'll see the max amounts. This is a situation where we could wind up at the end of the day, that zero line could be where that 2-inch line is. Just bear that in mind, okay? That's not impossible. And on the other hand, maybe there's a little room to tug that zero line a little bit further to the south. But that's a short-range issue that I'm just going to wait to see what the short-range models start doing with all of this as that moisture comes across the top. Maybe there'll be a little bit more to it as it moves eastward. I'm not holding my breath, but you know what? This might be the best chance that we have, at least for snow lovers this week, with regards to getting some reasonable snowfall. If you want to call a coating to a couple of inches reasonable, I'm having a tough time expending a whole lot of energy over a coating to a couple of inches snowfall. Mike Doughton, I hope I got that right. I've always heard that the Northeast was notoriously difficult to forecast during any season due to many different factors, unlike those easy areas of the U.S. Well, I'll say, thanks for the kudos, but I'll say this, Mike. As you know, over time, as I've broadened my live stream to talk about weather across much of the country, it's pretty easy to forecast when you're not there and you're kind of talking about things in a broad sense. You know, talking about a large geographic area. It's when you have to get specific for a specific data, you know, a specific point or a series of points. say the New York City area, for example, which has quite a varied climate from coast to inland, and sometimes things do surprise you, then it is tough. I think the Northeast is the wonderful thing about for weather geeks and weather enthusiasts and weather in the Northeast is that you really do get a little bit of everything. You get your snow, you get you get the occasional tropical storm. Sometime, every once in a while a hurricane comes up the coast. You get nor'easters. You get thunderstorm activity. Every so often you do, also see severe weather here, depending on the setup. So you get exposed to a little bit of everything, as opposed to say, if you live. When I worked down in Louisiana, when I worked in New Orleans, I saw snow and sleet, I think, on 2 separate days over a 4-year period, and that was maybe for about 5 minutes back in the mid 1980s. If you're a regular there, you're not going to see this stuff. So then in some ways it actually helps you because you're less biased. If you're a snow lover and you're working down in a place where it doesn't snow, you're able to look at models with a bit more impartial. Okay, you can take a look at it and not have that emotion driving you with regards to trying to forecast or wishcast a snowstorm. That goes away real fast when you're not in it, and you can look at it from a very unbiased angle. Johnny Quest, yes, the fat lady is on stage, and she is just waiting. She's about to get her cue here. Okay, it could come at any moment, but she's ready. The old line about the opera isn't over until the fat lady is sung, and I've said many times, she's on stage now, and she's cleared her throat, and she's ready for her cue, and she could go at any moment. And yes, spring baseball started last weekend, William Huber, no doubt about it. Does the sun come into play, Robert Hurley, temperature-wise in the middle of March? The ever-rising sun and sun angle and the increased daytime heating across the United States with the lengthening days, the average temperature here in the New York area and areas nearby rises by about 1 degree every 3.5 to 4 days. So your average high starts the month of March at 44 in New York City, for example. By March 31st, the average high is at about 56 or 7. That's a pretty steep rise. 12 degrees over 31 days. So it's basically a degree every 3 days in terms of the normals. That's a big deal. Okay, you start to get past March 20th, you start to get your average high is going over 50. This is why you would need either the blocking pattern set up, or you are going to need some really, really cold. You're going to have some blocking in the equation, but when you get to that point in the month of March, otherwise it's going to be very, very hard. Seasonal temperatures just don't cut it. Cynthia Guignatis, understanding the teleconnections. I'm going to do a primer on it, and it's really actually pretty easy in terms of what it means. It's a measure of pressure changes that go on in different geographies, and each one of those, some of them are obvious. Of course, you've got, just from the standpoint of what they stand for, the East Pacific Oscillation, EPO. Pacific North America is a bit vague. Pacific North America Index, the North Atlantic Oscillation. So what it basically says is that there are certain pressure patterns that it looks at, changes in pressure. For example, the North Atlantic Oscillation, in the geography that it covers, which is from 70 degrees west out to 10 degrees west, and in a zone from, I believe, from 45 degrees north to about 65 degrees north or 70 degrees north, right in there. So it's looking at these pressure changes that are going on in that particular area. It basically, as pressures build and pressures go up, higher pressures displace cold air southward, the index turns negative. So that's telling you over that relatively large geography that you've got higher pressures as you go further north into the Atlantic and lower pressures as you go south. So the problem with it is that it covers an area of geography that's 60 degrees wide. So where in that 60 degrees is the pressure the highest? It might be concentrated in the eastern part, which doesn't really do the East Coast a whole lot of good when it comes to bringing cold air and winter storms, for example. It could be more west on the western side, in which case, then yes, it would be a part of the equation as far as snow is concerned. But I'm gonna when we're all done with the winter, and I've got some time because that's going to require. I want to build some graphics so that you can actually see the geographic areas. But it's basically displacements of highs and lows. The problem is that there are certain combinations that forecasters look for with regards to it. For example, when the Pacific North America Index, which measures pressure changes both on the Pacific side and on the Atlantic side at the same time, okay? So it's a really big index. It covers a huge geographic area, and it also includes part of the Pacific tropics. So when that index gives a positive reading, it's basically showing a big high-pressure ridge in the upper atmosphere in the western part of the U.S., and favoring a deep trough in the eastern part of the United States. The problem is, again, we're talking large areas of geography where that pressure is measured. So is that index, is that strong positive reading, is it because you've got a ridge in the Rockies? Is the ridge along the west coast? Is the ridge just off the west coast going all the way up? Because that makes a huge difference. Same for the trough. Is the trough right along the immediate East Coast? Is it just inland of the East Coast? Or is the trough back more towards Chicago? Which is what we saw back, if I remember correctly, back through parts of January when we had the positive Pacific North America Index, and everybody was like, oh, this is great, this is great. No, the trough axis was wound up being close to 90. It was great for Chicago. It was great for Milwaukee. Great for the western part of the Great Lakes, for snow lovers in those areas, but it wasn't good for those in the east. But I'm going to put together that as one of the instructional videos. It's on my list of instructional videos to do once we get through the next couple of weeks, and I'll have enough downtime again to sit down and put one of those together. Okay, so let's leave it at that at this stage of the game, and we'll get back to this all tomorrow, of course, as we take a look at what little adventures the models are going to be taking us as we move forward. Tonight on the Joe and Joe Weather Show on Facebook, be sure to join us at 9:25 Eastern Time. We'll be sitting down and talking about the week ahead and this big wind event that we just went through, perhaps a bit more of a New York City, New Jersey, Hudson Valley, Long Island, southern New England, little bit of eastern Pennsylvania, more of the perspective contained in there. But nonetheless, we'll have the new NAM coming out, so we can live stream the new NAM and see what that tells us. And we could even look at the SREF plumes to see if they're trending higher. You snow lovers are going to want every quarter of an inch extra that it has up there. Additional weather coverage, of course, is always available on my Patreon platform, which is just at $2 a month. It's a great way to support my channel and support my live streams, and you get a lot of extra weather. It's very much a place for weather geeks to get into. Cover a lot of stuff. We do extra live streams. You can message me at any time, and I'll get back to you with a timely response. In the meantime, if you'd like, you can download my free weather app for all mobile devices, and I'll put the link up here on the chat for you. And this is absolutely free. But if you like it all, you feel like supporting it, it's just $2 a month on Patreon, or you can become a supporter on Facebook for just $1. It's a little thing, but a lot of this stuff costs, and it helps out. And I really would like to add a few other items and actually come out with a second app. So, the support is greatly appreciated. Izzy, I will upload on the app tonight the Joe and Joe Show if I have time. It depends on what time I get home and how sleepy I am. But if I upload it, it will. You'll get a notification that it's there. If it's not tonight, Usually I wait till the morning to send it out. I don't like sending out notifications at midnight when everybody's asleep or trying to get some sleep, and suddenly my notification winds up being the thing that wakes them up. I don't want to do that. All right. Have a great evening, everybody. I hope you had a great weekend. Have a good evening, and we'll look forward to you being here tomorrow. Thanks very much. Good night, everybody.